Shana Tova. The story is told of two elderly Jews in New York City, Abe and Shmuel, who ride the subway together every day on their way to work. Every morning, Abe and Shmuel sit next to each other, each one reading from the famous Yiddish daily newspaper, Der Vorwärts. And every morning, Abe and Shmuel bemoan the terrible state of affairs, the problems of the world, and especially all the many depressing things affecting the Jews. One morning, Shmuel sits down next to Abe, and each man opens his newspaper, but Abe looks up in amazement to discover that Shmuel this morning has brought a copy of Der Stürmer, the German-language Nazi newspaper. Dumbfounded, Abe shrieks, "Shmuel, what the heck are you reading?" Shmuel says, "Every day we read in Der Vorwärts how terrible things are, how hated we are, conflict between the Jews, poverty, illness. I picked up this newspaper today. It says the Jews own the banks, the Jews run the government, Jews run Hollywood, and Jews have all the power. No, is it a crime that it makes me feel a little better about myself?" And that, my friends, is old Jewish joke number 487. Ugh. It's not in good taste, but the truly terrible thing is that this very old Jewish joke could just as easily be told today using digital media versions of these, by the way. I want to talk today about the very tricky place that this joke traverses, what I'll call the limitations and the legitimacy of particularism. Particularism, it's a word that can have many meanings, but for the moment I mean two aspects. The theological concept that only one specific group are saved or right, and the political or social ideology of having a primary allegiance or attachment to one's own group or people. It's a debate that's at the heart of the current complicated situation in the state of Israel, and this is a debate that cuts to the center of what it means to be a Jew in the modern world. First, though, a confession. There's a place of our service that I almost never say along with you because I simply can't bring myself to say the words. You probably haven't noticed because I'm nearly always facing the ark when Aleinu comes around, but ever since I first closely studied the meaning of this prayer, I've been uncomfortable with a particular phrase of our service, though I've kept it as the custom of Temple Isaiah for the last 11 years. You see, prayers are hard to change, habits are hard to break. You need a really good reason, or perhaps a specific opportunity, like, say for instance, the arrival of a new assistant rabbi, one who likes to ask difficult and uncomfortable questions.
How you doing?
In sitting with Rabbi Weiss this summer, reviewing the customs of Temple Isaiah, I said something like, well, we always do the Aleinu that's at the traditional version at the bottom of page 586, though I never say it because I totally don't believe in it. And she said something earth-shattering and complex like, well, why don't you change that, Senior Rabbi Axler? Just about like that. Wait, I can change how we pray? Aleinu, a prayer that means good, it's almost time for the oneg. Thank you. Was originally said only on Rosh HaShanah, maybe even in the first temple, more than 2,500 years ago. This makes it one of the oldest non-biblical prayers that we have. Earlier in the service, Cantor Droller sang the Great Aleinu during the first of the shofar calls, the distinctive tune and the more pronounced bow, done just on this sacred morning, recalling the ancient temple worship. But what do these words mean? Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol. It is up to us to praise the sovereign of the universe, to proclaim the greatness of the creator of all. So far, so good, at least for my own theology. I mean, a God who creates the universe, what better way to elevate and sanctify our commitment to environmental stewardship? But quickly we arrive at the words that I simply cannot pray. Shelo asanu kegoyei ha'aratzot, velo samanu kamishpachot ha'adama. Let us praise the God who has not created us like other nations of all lands, nor made us like the other families of all the earth, who did not make our lot like theirs, nor made our destiny like those other peoples. Praying in Hebrew gives some the sense of a familiar warm blanket. The air of authenticity, saying the same words for thousands of years, whether we understand them or not. However, is it okay to say words just because they're the tradition, and even if we wrestle with or wholly refute their meanings, or maybe we don't even understand them? For me, the idea that I reject here is the concept of Jewish superiority. That somehow the Jewish people were created by God as inherently better than other peoples. From time immemorial, the chosen people has been a subject of debate. Now, a positive spin can be claimed. God has designated the Jewish people to a level of responsibility, to the task of being a light unto nations or similar. However, with the Aleinu, the authors had something much more triumphalist in mind. Evidence of this is that the earlier versions of the prayer contained an additional phrase, one which few in this room have likely ever prayed. The traditional original text of the prayer builds on the idea that Jews are somehow special and different by saying, Shehem mishtachavim lehevel v'rik, u'mipalalim el lo yoshia. For they, that is, non-Jews, bow down to emptiness and vanity and pray to a God who cannot save them. Cue the uncomfortable groan. Thank you. This was removed from the Ashkenazi prayer books in the late 15th century. However, this colorful phrase has two additional elements. Many medieval Jews saw these words as coded references to Christianity and Islam, as the numerical equivalent in Hebrew could be equivalent to the names of Jesus and Muhammad. It's a little creative Jewish math. And if that's not enough, among some communities, it was the custom to say this line and then to spit. The word corresponding to vanity sounds very similar to the Hebrew to spit, and not something that we considered with the recent renovations at TI, but some European synagogues actually had spittoons on the aisle to accommodate this practice. I know we totally missed a dedicatory opportunity there, so Deborah Adler, Larry Gordon, you guys listening here? All right? Okay, we can go back to that. As much as I make light of this, it is relevant to note that while removed for centuries from the Siddur, the most widely published Orthodox prayer book in circulation today, all reinserted the phrase in recent decades. You see, this is a sentiment that is alive and well among some Jews today. For 200 years, Reform Jews have struggled with this particularism, either choosing to remove it completely or to reconstruct alternate versions. For those of a certain generation, you may remember the old Union prayer book. Let us adore the ever-living God and render praise unto Him who spread out the heavens and established the earth. I see some people who want to keep on singing, I think, right? The translators working on the Machzor in your hands sanitized the traditional Hebrew text with an interpretive translation. They wrote, "Ours is the duty to praise the All-Sovereign, to honor the artist of creation who made us unique in the human family with a destiny all our own." Creative liturgists have offered alternative versions of the prayer for decades. As an option in Mishkan HaNefesh appears, Shehu asanu l'shomrei ha'adama, vehu samanu l'shlichei ha'torah. We praise the one who trusts us to be guardians of the earth and messengers of the Torah, who gives us a destiny shared with all human beings, and who binds our lives to theirs. I find this sentiment to be totally lovely. Trouble is, the Hebrew's really cumbersome. So for the moment, we at Temple Isaiah will begin by transposing the middle paragraph of Aleinu, a phrase already familiar to many, in place of the troubling phrases. As we conclude services this morning and into the future, we will continue singing Shehu noteh shamayim v'yosed haaretz u'moshav yikarov hashamayim mima'al. Familiar words, different melody, right? We praise the one who spread out the heavens and established the earth, whose seat of glory is in the heavens above, whose greatness is revealed throughout the world. You are our God, there is none else. Changing familiar liturgy is difficult and often uncomfortable. Some might say, great, I finally learned a prayer and now the rabbi wants to change the words, you know? But change is one of the only actual constants in life, in nature, and yes, in Judaism. I believe this will allow me, and perhaps others who've been silently uncomfortable already, to join the congregation singing these words together. Now, there are some who might feel also that I'm not only making a mountain out of a molehill, but trying to make Judaism so universal, so parve, that it's no longer special or distinct, which is why I'd like to pivot at this moment. Having begun with the limitations of particularism, I'd also like to stand up for their legitimacy as well. I recently spent 3 days at the Rabbinic Zionist Coalition in Washington, D.C. This recently relatively new gathering came about in part with the COVID disruption of the AIPAC Policy Conference. At the outset of this conference, the question was asked, why is there a need for a Rabbinic Zionist coalition? It was once an assumption that rabbis support Israel. This is not necessarily true today, as there are rabbis across the denominations, but particularly within our Reform movement, there are rabbis who proclaim that they need not support the idea of the state of Israel to be a leader in the Jewish community. There are synagogues that self-define as non-Zionist or even anti-Zionist in their ideology. Not since the early 20th century has there been substantial support for a position that argues that Israel ought not exist. And in those days, it was advanced mostly by assimilationists, anxious to dispel the charge of dual loyalty, worried about damaging their standing as new Americans. And those early anti-Zionists that advocated this position, they were advocating it at a time when the Holocaust was beyond their most horrible nightmares. But today, with full knowledge of the catastrophe that was Jewish statelessness, Jewish powerlessness, the death of so many who attempted to flee the growing strength of the Nazis. Today, with an awareness of the forces of growing anti-Semitism in far-flung places and close to home. Today, with a full assessment of history to actively oppose the existence of the Jewish state, as a leader in our Jewish community, as someone tasked with raising and educating the next generation of Jewish young people, I simply cannot imagine it. But imagine it we must, because this reality is on our doorstep. I want to make clear at the outset that I by no means believe that Israel is perfect or blameless or uncomplicated. But I'd like to start with a general proposal. The state of Israel, established just over 75 years ago in the perpetual ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, the state of Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state in this world, with defensible borders, international recognition, and the ability to function as any other country in the family of nations. Lacking this starting point, I have little else to say. But if we can agree on that, I'd like to make a case for the legitimacy of a specific point of particularism. That is, that Israel is, as the doctrine known as Israel's Basic Laws proclaim, a Jewish and democratic state. This principle, Jewish and democratic, is really at the heart of the current struggles in Israel. I want to emphasize something that I think needs to be said here and needs to be said by me for our community. There is no Israel that is not democratic, and there is no Israel that is not Jewish. For some American Jews who've grown distant from, or even turned against Israel, it is precisely the idea of a Jewish state that rubs them wrong. But understanding the elements that make Israel a Jewish state is important. The use of the Hebrew tongue as its official language, the incorporation of Jewish culture and tradition and observance into all aspects of the society, the law of return that promises that any Jew has the ability to make aliyah or to seek protective refuge from persecution. A state whose decisive majority identify as Jews while explicitly affording full citizenship to individuals regardless of their religion. None of these elements that make Israel a Jewish state necessarily obligate the imposition of religious requirements by state law on any of Israel's citizens. In point of fact, it is precisely the counterbalance of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state that ensures Israel's Jewish character does not negate the rights of her non-Jewish citizens. This has been the 75-year history of our beloved Israel. Not perfect, and certainly not easy. There were moments that tried this very commitment, and yet time and again, the democratic nature of Israel has withstood one difficult test after another. Which brings us to the current day, to the situation over the last 9 months during which Israelis have poured out onto the streets in demonstrations, large and small, protesting for democracy and supporting the principle that Israel remain a Jewish and democratic state. On Temple Isaiah's Israel trip this past spring, participants gathered in Jerusalem a short 36 hours after landing in protest outside of the president's residence, adding their voices to the chorus for democracy. The following Saturday night found us in Tel Aviv, where Pam and I spent several hours in a massive demonstration that set off from Dizengoff Square. That night, an estimated 350,000 Israelis flooded the streets of Tel Aviv. In relative terms, that would be equivalent to 18.5 million Americans gathering for a single demonstration, which, by the way, is nearly 4 times the largest gathering of U.S. protests in history. But it was not just that week. Demonstrations of this size and fervor have been consistent since January and continue today, even this week. So, what did we experience in that sea of humanity? It was a fervent pride in Israel, a deep patriotism, love for the flag, the diversity of the participants, secular and religious, Jews of every ethnic background, all ages, small children smiling on shoulders and elderly veterans of every one of Israel's wars with walkers and wheelchairs. And what brought them out? It's a love for the state of Israel. For some, this state became their haven and homeland, fleeing from oppression and anti-Semitism elsewhere. Others are the children and grandchildren of generation upon generation, tracing back to the first waves of Aliyah nearly 150 years ago. And still others trace uninterrupted family lines back to biblical times. They came out to defend and fight for the soul of the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. We were moved by the patriotism and optimism in these protests. As deeply challenging and depressing as these months have been, for those who are fighting for this vision, most will note a level of engagement and energy reborn among those in the center of Israeli society, an enthusiasm that had been dormant for years, largely due to the failure of prolonged peace processes with the Palestinians. See, there's only so long that idealism can survive faced with cynical rejection on the other side of the table again and again. But a spirit of hope, tikvah, a determination to wrest control of Israel's future from her most extreme parties, has been rekindled on the streets of the state of Israel. It will not be an easy or straightforward journey, but I'm confident that their future is bright. So what to do from 5,500 plus miles away? What to do as American Reform Jews sitting comfortably in the diaspora? A recent letter penned by Israeli thought leaders Yossi Klein Halevi, Daniel Gordis, and Mati Friedman makes a point that I'd like all in this sanctuary to hear today. This difficult moment is not a time to turn away from Israel. It is uncomfortable and complex, infuriating at times and heartbreaking at others. Lamrot hakol, despite all of this, the current moment is one to lean in to Israel. The authors write to us, quote, "With Israelis on the streets, fighting for the liberal values they share with so many Jews around the world, this is no time for diaspora silence or alienation. To the contrary, when someone you love is in danger, you draw closer. After many years during which the divide between Israel and diaspora has grown, this is a moment for diaspora Jews to find common ground with Israelis, fighting for a country of which we can all be proud." Lean in. Read, follow, educate yourselves on the history and the current events. Understand the complex nature of the democracy protests. Learn the long story of Israel's efforts to remain a Jewish and democratic state, the struggles and the successes. Last year at this time, I invited members of the congregation to join me and Pam on a journey to Israel. Once again, I'm making that same invitation, though this time, I'm thrilled to be inviting families with school-aged children to join us on a family mission. Due to the nature of our secular school breaks this year, we will land on Friday morning in Tel Aviv, spend Shabbat, and then celebrate Purim, the most joyous of celebrations on the streets of the true and actual city that never sleeps. Until you've spent Purim in Israel, you've not known Purim. We will hit all the highlights, but also dig deep into the ancient and modern complexities of Israel. Part of why I'm excited for my first family trip to Israel is because I know that helping our young people understand Israel on a visceral level, to connect beyond the headlines, is one of the most important tasks we have as a Jewish community, and one of my most sacred duties as a rabbi. Lev was fortunate enough to travel to Israel on birthright this past summer. Talking with our high school students who've spent summers or semesters in Israel, our college students whose birthright journeys have opened their eyes, I know the ways in which adding complexity and nuance to their Israel education only fortifies their commitment to Israel's strength and survival. Our Israel Book Club at TI has brought adults together to learn, discuss, and engage. And I'm hoping in the next year to energize members to form a standing Israel Activities Committee of Temple Isaiah. Our new shlicha through the Federation, Stav, will join us on the stage this afternoon at Rosh HaShanah in our park to emphasize the interconnectedness of our communities. This is a time to lean in to that connection. This is a time to emphasize the legitimacy of a particularistic notion that Israel is and must remain a Jewish and democratic state. Rabbi Hillel taught, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" A friend recently observed that as Reform Jews, we are particularly good at emphasizing the middle of Hillel's three-part quote. There is not a marginalized group of people we do not stand with, not a cause far away that we can't get behind, while we skip right over the first part of the axiom. But being for yourself, for your needs and rights, is nothing to be ashamed of. And I don't think they're entirely wrong, my friend, though I will say that taking any one part of Hillel's phrase and disconnecting it from the others is like separating head from heart from hands. They're all interdependent and essential. The legitimacy of particularism. Yes, it is valid for Israel to be a Jewish and democratic state. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? The limitations of particularism. We need not see ourselves as inherently better or more holy than other peoples, as the God that I want to affirm and praise loves all of humanity equally. If I'm only for myself, what am I? And the essential conclusion of Hillel, Im lo achshav matai, if not now, when? Lean in, care, stand up for what you believe, stand beside your neighbors. Don't fear change, particularly when it moves you forward. You must not remain indifferent. Im lo achshav matai, if not now, when? From me and my family to you and yours, I wish you a Shana Tova u'Mituka, blessings for a good, a sweet, and most of all, a healthy new year of 5784. And now it is a great pleasure to call on Alex.